What's the scariest thing that's ever happened to you that nobody believes? Back in high school, I was driving home late on a quiet rural road. It was about 2 a.m., and the area was heavily forested, about 40 miles from the nearest town. There was absolutely no reason for anyone to be out there. Then my headlights caught someone walking in the dark on the shoulder of the road. He was walking away from me, wearing a black business suit and carrying a briefcase. I thought his car might have broken down somewhere. City people did that sometimes, and would end up wandering for hours. I wanted to help. I was not stupid enough to get out of my car, but I was stupid enough to stop. The guy did not even react. He just kept walking away, completely ignoring my high beams on his back. It was like I was not even there. My dumb ass decided to roll my window down and yell out to ask if he was okay. He reacted to my voice, and he reacted strongly. The dude whipped around with a bug-eyed, dead expression and immediately sprinted towards my car. Next thing I know, he started beating the absolute shit out of my hood with his briefcase. The case must have been solid metal because it left deep, sharp gashes in the frame. I froze in pure terror. Before I could process it, he climbed right onto my hood. He pounded cracks into my windshield with the briefcase, while trying to reach into my open window with his other hand. Through it all, he kept staring right at me with that unblinking, deadpan face. After a few agonizing seconds, I came to my senses and slammed the car in reverse. He slid off the hood, crashing onto the gravel about 15 feet in front of me. My car was a manual transmission, and I was still terrible at driving it. While I was frantically panicking with the gear shift, he got right back up. He was covered in dirt and fresh scrape marks, but he started limping right towards me again. I finally got it into gear just in time. I lurched forward, swerving inches away from his outstretched arm. I stayed in high gear and did not slow down until I reached my house. I never passed any abandoned vehicles before or after the encounter. The nearest crossroads were miles away, so how he got there remains a complete mystery. I told my parents the instant I got home, but to this day, they are convinced it is just an elaborate lie to hide the fact that I hit a deer. Yeah, because deer leave deep angular metal gashes all over a car. Everyone else I have told says it sounds like a cheap campfire story. In hindsight, I consider myself lucky it was not a coordinated ambush, and just a highly dangerous, unstable individual. I left myself completely vulnerable out there. Cultural note. In vast rural areas of the United States, law enforcement agencies frequently warn drivers against stopping for pedestrians on isolated, unlit roads at night. Criminal elements and highly unstable individuals under the influence of severe stimulants occasionally use the illusion of a stranded motorist or pedestrian to slow down passing vehicles, making the driver an immediate target for violent carjackings or severe property damage. I was forced into a strict religious organization as a child, and later forced to go on a 2-year mission in South America. The second I came back home, I officially cut all ties with that church. What I am about to tell you is something none of my religious friends or family ever believed. During that mission, I was practically starving to death. I would regularly go 96 hours between meals because the mission president kept withholding the money that had been set aside for us. The environment out there was incredibly hostile. I witnessed the aftermath of violence in the streets on multiple occasions. I was almost stabbed over a simple daily planner, and I even had local church members put broken glass into my food. I had people openly threaten me on more than one occasion. I suffered from severe heat exhaustion and nearly froze during the harsh southern winter, but none of that compares to the absolute worst part of the experience. I later discovered that I had been eating something unimaginable without ever realizing it. According to the police, An elderly Bolivian woman had grown tired of her husband, and investigators believed she was responsible for his death and had tried to conceal what happened through the small empanada stand she operated on the street. She only got caught because her neighbors grew highly suspicious of her movements. They followed her late one night when she tried to toss a heavy duffel bag into the nearby river. She missed the water, and the bag landed right on the muddy bank. Right around that same time, I walked over to her food stand to buy my usual half-priced empanadas. Instead, I found the local police completely tearing her stand apart. I approached the officers to ask what was happening, and they explained the entire situation to me. Their faces turned pale when they realized I had been eating at that exact stand since day one. That was the moment I understood why they were looking at me that way. I had been buying food there for weeks without having any idea of the terrible truth behind that little stand. The terrifying truth is that I had been in survival mode for so long that my mind simply refused to process what I had just learned. My companion, however, had a complete breakdown after learning the truth. When the other missionaries in the area eventually found out, they all started calling me Elder Dahmer, long before I even knew who Jeffrey was. Cultural note: religious missions in remote parts of South America often place young adults in highly isolated environments with limited support systems. Financial hardship, unfamiliar local conditions, and the absence of immediate assistance can leave foreign volunteers vulnerable to dangerous and unpredictable situations. The nickname Elder Dahmer was a dark joke used by the other missionaries, referencing Jeffrey Dahmer, an infamous American criminal known worldwide for the nature of his menu, a disturbing parallel to the events experienced in this story. I am not entirely sure if my experience fits the usual definition of a paranormal encounter. Nobody actually doubts that this terrifying thing happened to me. It is just that very few people truly understand the absolute crushing weight of how terrifying it actually was. To give you the short version, I was on a long road trip across state lines with my sister and her young kids. We had been driving for hours and decided to pull over at a standard interstate rest area to stretch our legs. While the adults congregated around a park bench near the vending machines, my 5-year-old nephew slowly wandered off toward a different bench about 30 feet away, hidden behind some thick bushes. We found him quickly enough, probably about 3 or 4 minutes after we first noticed his absence. But holy fuck, was that ever the longest and most horrid 4 minutes of my entire life? The sheer adrenaline and the cold sweat that broke out over my skin made the environment feel completely distorted. The only positive thing to ever come out of that nightmare is that nothing else in this world has ever terrified me in comparison to that moment. A tragic car accident? I would gladly have one of those every single day of my life if it meant I never had to experience the sickening feeling of a missing child again. A massive miscarriage of justice puts me inside a maximum security prison with a target glued to my back. If it means I never have to feel what I felt when my nephew disappeared into thin air, I will bring the glue myself. Attacked by a couple of rabid, aggressive dogs? Come on, let us get this show started right now. The slowest and most painful situation is honestly preferable to the life I would have been forced to live had my nephew not been found safe and sound on that bench. Cultural note: interstate rest areas in the United States are heavily monitored by highway safety campaigns due to their unique layout, which often blends high-speed highway access with dense, isolated landscaping. Security studies show that the immediate psychological panic experienced by guardians during a child's brief disappearance in these transit zones mimics severe trauma, primarily because the proximity to open multi-state freeways drastically reduces the perceived window for successful intervention. It was our first date. After dinner, He told me he wanted to show me a special place before taking me home. He drove us to a huge park with a lake in the middle of the night. As soon as we parked, he started trying to convince me to take off my shoes so we could walk by the water together. He kept smiling and saying it would be incredibly romantic. I got an instant bad feeling in my stomach. The place was pitch black and deserted. I told him the area was probably closed for the night and that we should honestly leave right away. He ignored me, put the car in park, and stepped out to check the main entrance gate. When the interior light of the car turned on, I glanced at the floorboards in the back. My heart dropped. There was a thick, heavy roll of rope sitting right behind his seat. Luckily, the park was completely locked up tight, and he could not find a way in. The moment he climbed back into the driver's seat, my survival instincts kicked in. I looked down at my phone and lied. I told him my mom just called me about a massive emergency at home and that she was expecting me back within the next 30 minutes. His face went completely cold, but he did not say a word. He drove me straight back to my place in total silence. The second I stepped out of his vehicle, he blocked my profile on the dating app before even pulling away from the curb. I never shared his real name, his license plate, or our location with my family or friends. I had absolutely no proof of what happened out there. No one in my circle believes me when I tell them the story, but I know in my gut that if that park gate had been open, he was going to do something truly terrible to me that night. Cultural note: safety experts in the United States heavily emphasize the use of safety check-ins when meeting someone from a dating application for the first time. Standard precautions include sharing live location data with a trusted contact, taking a screenshot of the date's profile, and explicitly texting the vehicle's license plate number before entering the car, as modern digital footprints are crucial for law enforcement if an emergency arises. For as long as I can remember, I have experienced things that I simply cannot explain. The strangest part is that these experiences always seem to begin after I go through a major trauma or a devastating emotional loss. Every time my life is shaken, it is almost as if something inside me changes and impossible things start happening around me. Over the years, I have found myself giving complete strangers incredibly specific messages that I had no logical way of knowing. On more than one occasion, I have described events from decades earlier with details that were later confirmed to be accurate. Even now, I cannot explain where that information came from. One experience has stayed with me more than any other. I unknowingly warned my wife's ex-husband that he had an undiagnosed illness affecting his lungs, even though he had not yet undergone any medical testing. The warning came after what I can only describe as an encounter with his late father, a man I had never met in my life. During that same experience, I learned his grandparents' full names. I had definitely never met them or even heard their names mentioned in conversation before. I also witnessed the exact final moment my stepdaughter saw her grandfather when she was just a baby. I have dealt with a lot of these different encounters over the years. They can be absolutely terrifying, or sometimes peaceful yet highly informative. It is the strangest thing to live with. Whether these experiences are something supernatural, a strange response to trauma, or simply something my mind cannot explain, I honestly do not know. All I know is that they have happened too many times for me to dismiss them as coincidence, and I have learned to live with questions I may never be able to answer. Cultural note: parapsychological studies and behavioral research in the United States often analyze reports of sudden heightened perception or alleged mediumship following severe physical or psychological trauma, while mainstream neuroscience attributes these phenomena to post-traumatic dissociation or hypervigilance within various regional subcultures. These occurrences are deeply integrated into spiritual traditions regarding generational warnings and unverified personal history transmission. The entire ordeal is way too long to cover in full detail here, but I need to get this off my chest. When I was only 16 years old, I made the terrible mistake of moving several states away from my hometown. I went to live with a boyfriend who was in his mid to late 20s. It did not take long for the relationship to turn into a complete living nightmare. He completely cut me off from the outside world and kept me inside his property against my will. That night, he forced me to sit still while holding a knife close enough to make his threat unmistakable. Looking me straight in the eyes, he warned me that trying to escape again would have serious consequences. I started screaming at the top of my lungs, begging for help, but he just laughed in my face and told me to keep it up. He calmly explained that the neighbors were completely used to the noise. He said I could scream all I wanted because nobody around there paid attention anymore. Nobody came, not the police, not the neighbors, and not even his own parents, even though we were living in the guest house on their property. To this day, I still don't know exactly how long I stayed there, or everything that happened during those dark weeks. My memory blocks out most of the physical trauma. I just vividly remember standing alone in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at my reflection, and whispering to myself over and over that everything was going to be okay. The nightmare finally ended when he suddenly decided he no longer wanted me there. He openly told his parents that if they didn't send me home, something terrible was eventually going to happen. Terrified of the legal consequences, his parents finally called my mom and dad, whom I had been forbidden from contacting for months. They demanded that my family pay for half of the long-distance bus fare before they would send me back home. During that grueling 3-day bus ride across state lines, I stared out the window, repeating that same phrase to myself like a broken record. I never told my parents a single detail about what happened out there. See, I was one of those rebellious kids who broke every single rule. I had run away before, visited multiple counselors, and even spent time in halfway houses. Because of my messy track record, my parents simply never bothered to ask questions. Over the years, I have tried opening up to people, including 2 of my sisters, close friends, and even professional psychiatrists. Nobody ever believes me. One of my sisters acts like she believes something bad happened, but she insists it could not have been nearly as terrifying as I claim. They think I am just exaggerating for attention, but the severe panic attacks and intense night terrors I suffered from for years tell a completely different story. Cultural note: in the United States, runaways and juveniles with a history of behavioral issues often face a higher risk of exploitation and predatory relationships. Because of existing biases, law enforcement and even family members sometimes dismiss their testimonies, leaving vulnerable teens isolated and without support. I was driving home completely alone at 2 a.m. on an isolated rural highway. The asphalt was totally empty, stretching out into the dark. Suddenly, my high beams caught a man standing directly in the middle of my lane. He was not walking or crossing. He was just standing there facing my vehicle, completely still like a statue. I braked hard, my tires screeching against the road as I swerved into the next lane to avoid him. As I passed the exact spot, I looked out my side window. There was absolutely nobody there, just empty asphalt. I desperately told myself it was just a deer, a weird trick of the light, or a split-second episode of microsleep. I kept driving because when you are out there in the middle of nowhere, what else are you supposed to do? But here is the exact part that absolutely nobody believes when I tell them. About a mile down the road, I came around a sharp blind bend, and there was a massive accident. It was fresh. A car had just spun off the road into the ditch, and a guy was standing on the asphalt, waving his arms frantically for help. If I had not already been white-knuckle awake, with my adrenaline pumping and driving 30 miles under the speed limit because of whatever I saw a minute earlier, I would have come around that dark corner at full speed. I would have crashed right into them. I have never figured out what to do with that night. The rational explanation is that I was exhausted. My tired brain invented a hazard out of a shadow, and my slow, careful driving afterward was just a frightened person being cautious. That is almost certainly what happened. But every single time I tell this story, people immediately hear, "A phantom on the road saved my life." They either roll their eyes in disbelief or get weird about it. So I mostly just keep it to myself now. It was probably just a tired brain playing tricks on an empty highway. Probably. Cultural note. Sleep scientists and highway safety institutions in the United States frequently document the phenomenon of highway hypnosis and vivid waking dreams during long-distance night driving. Under extreme fatigue, the human brain can experience brief micro-episodes of REM sleep while the eyes remain open, projecting highly realistic visual anomalies onto the dark road, which often triggers an immediate survival reflex from the driver. A few years ago, I was up around 3 a.m. debugging some code for a tight deadline. I had my heavy noise-canceling headphones over my ears, completely in the zone, staring at my monitor. But out of nowhere, I kept feeling this faint, rhythmic thumping vibrating through my chair and the old apartment floorboards. I finally slipped the headphones off, and the dead silence of the room hit me instantly. Then I heard it clear as day. Someone was aggressively, violently jiggling my front door handle. It was not the casual mistake of a drunk neighbor. This person was trying to snap the lock mechanism from the outside. I froze in place, my hands hovering over the keyboard. I slowly pushed myself out of my chair, trying not to make the wood creak, and crept over to the entryway. My breathing was short and shallow as I leaned in toward the peephole. Through the tiny lens, I saw a guy in a heavy, oversized dark hoodie. He was holding what looked like a long, flathead screwdriver, desperately trying to wedge it deep into the metal door frame. My heart was pounding so hard against my ribs that I was genuinely terrified he could hear it through the wood. I grabbed my phone with shaking fingers, dialed 911, and began whispering to the emergency dispatcher. But here's the absolute most terrifying part that no one ever believes when I tell them. While I was frantically whispering to the operator, the guy suddenly stopped dead. He pulled the screwdriver out of the frame, stood perfectly still for 3 agonizing seconds, and then leaned his face in to look directly into the peephole. Logically, I know it is a one-way lens and the hallway was dark. He could not see me inside, but it felt like he was staring right into my eyes, searching my soul. A sick smile spread across his face. He tapped the door twice with his knuckles knock-knock, and then calmly walked away down the hall. The cops arrived about 10 minutes later, but the hallway was already empty. The only proof left behind were the deep, fresh gouge marks all around my deadbolt. I broke my lease and moved out exactly 1 week later. To this day, I can never wear noise-canceling headphones when I am home alone. Cultural note. In the United States, residential door hardware standard testing often classifies intruders into opportunistic and determined. Most casual burglars will flee the moment a lock resists for more than 60 seconds, or if they suspect someone is inside. A suspect who deliberately signals his awareness to the resident through the door peephole indicates high psychological confidence and predatory behavior, transitioning the event from a standard property crime to a targeted home invasion attempt. Like what you see? Subscribe to the Reddit Oracle for more. Most people who do not regularly work with heavy machinery or landscaping tools probably do not know how dangerous a standard chainsaw can truly be. There is a specific violent anomaly called kickback that can happen in a split second when you are sawing through a massive log. If the spinning blade suddenly hits a dense knot of wood, a hidden rock, or some piece of old metal that the tree grew around, the entire machine will violently fly backward directly toward the operator's upper body. Decades ago, after countless workers suffered horrific facial injuries or lost their lives out in the woods, manufacturers started installing a safety feature called a chain break. If the blade strikes something too solid, the physical force triggers a mechanism that instantly shuts down the motor before the teeth can do any damage. I was out sawing large logs with a close friend of mine who was working several yards to my right. Out of nowhere, the roar of his engine was cut short by a massive metallic clanking sound. Ka-chunk! I whipped my head around to check on him. My friend was now flat on his back in the dirt, the running saw laying inches away from his legs, with a huge cloud of sawdust kicking up all around his body. He slowly pushed himself up and walked over to me, his eyes incredibly wide, looking like he had just seen a ghost. That is when I noticed his heavy work shirt was cleanly torn from the collar down about 4 inches. The saw had kicked back on him with full force. The mechanical chain brake worked just fast enough for the spinning blade to only slice open the heavy fabric of his clothes before stopping completely. If it had not been for that specific piece of modern safety technology, he would have taken a 4-inch open gash straight to his chest. Cultural note: industrial safety regulations in the United States underwent massive transformations during the late 20th century due to strict updates by the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, commonly known as OSHA. The mandatory integration of mechanical inertia-activated chain brakes on outdoor power equipment drastically altered survival statistics for logging and agricultural workers, turning what used to be fatal workplace anomalies into close-call incidents. Back in my senior year of high school, I went down to Tijuana with a small group of friends. We brought our Scandinavian foreign exchange student along for the trip. He ended up getting way too drunk and decided to become a general menace to everyone around. Because of his chaotic behavior, we got pulled over and cornered by the local Mexican police. Our group consisted of 4 boys and 2 girls, completely isolated in an unfamiliar area late at night. My brother was with us during the encounter. He had spent an entire year on an exchange program in a very rural part of Argentina, so he was pretty fluent in Spanish. The thing is, the rest of us were super white and blonde. The officers immediately assumed that absolutely nobody in our vehicle could understand a single word of their language. They stood right outside our windows, casually discussing exactly what they were going to do to us in private. I watched my brother's face go completely white for a split second as he listened to their conversation. He quickly forced himself to put on a perfect poker face, turned to the rest of the car, and whispered for everyone to hand over every single dollar we had on us. He immediately started negotiating with the officers in English, never once letting on that he understood their actual plans. Thanks to his quick thinking, we managed to escape the situation by handing over about $74. He never told us what those officers were planning to do to our group, though to this day, he strictly insists that he never wants to talk about that night ever again. Cultural note: travelers from the United States visiting border towns like Tijuana are frequently monitored by safety advisories regarding aggressive extortion tactics by rogue local authorities. Security protocols heavily emphasize remaining inside the vehicle during random checkpoints, as foreign nationals often become immediate targets for high-value financial demands or forced detentions under the assumption that they lack local legal representation or language comprehension. I was living in a fairly modern suburban house a few years back, so there was absolutely no historical reason for anything strange to happen. But one night, right around 11 p.m., I was heading up to my room. The entire house was pitch black, so I had my phone's flashlight turned on, shining it directly down the empty steps right in front of me. Out of nowhere, the dead silence of the hallway was shattered. I heard these rapid, heavy, loud-ass stomps sprinting straight up the stairs. The terrifying part? The steps were visibly empty, but I could literally see the wood warp and bend under the immense weight of whatever unseen thing was charging directly toward my position. I froze completely at the top of the landing, my phone shaking in my hand. The stomping reached the final step, and a violent rush of freezing cold wind blasted right past my face. There was no other sound in the house except for the low, rhythmic hum of the AC unit. My mind instantly raced to the worst possible scenarios. I kept hoping it was just the ghost of a stray dog, but part of my brain could not shake the terrifying image of a shadow person pulling a twisted upside-down crawl straight up the wood. Nobody in my family believed me when I told them. They said it was just the structural frame settling. A few weeks later, something even worse happened in that exact same house. I was taking a quick morning nap right before walking over to my school. I was trapped in that weird, transient state of mind where your eyes are closed, but you can still hear every subtle thing going on around you. Suddenly, I heard my bedroom door creak open very slowly. I lay perfectly still, facing the bedroom wall, completely paralyzed by a sudden wave of intense internal panic. I heard faint footsteps creep right up to my bedside, and then the presence just stood there, towering over my bed. I could literally see a dark, heavy shadow casting over my body and onto the bedroom wall. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I worked up every single ounce of courage I had, whipped around fast, ready to yell at my younger brother for playing a sick prank on me. Of course, the room was entirely empty. The door was shut tight. I asked everyone in the house afterward, but absolutely nobody fessed up to messing with my room. To this day, they all think I just imagined the entire thing. Cultural note: in American psychological and sleep studies, the transient state between waking and sleeping is frequently evaluated as hypnagogia. During this brief window, the human brain can experience vivid waking dreams, auditory anomalies, and visual projections that feel entirely indistinguishable from reality, often leading individuals to report heavy architectural shadows or unseen presences in otherwise normal domestic environments. When I was growing up, every kid in our town had heard the classic rumor about a strange man driving a white van, looking to snatch children off the streets. It felt like a standard urban legend designed to keep us from wandering too far. But one summer afternoon, my brother and I were outside riding our bicycles right in front of our house. Out of nowhere, a faded white work van slowly pulled up alongside the curb. The driver rolled down his window and casually asked us for directions to a nearby street. Even back then, our survival instincts kicked in. We both knew that if an adult is asking a tiny child for driving directions, something is completely wrong. He kept pressuring us to stay away from the house, explicitly telling us not to go get our mother. He then suggested we should just hop into the passenger seat to show him the way. The second he said that, we dropped our bikes and sprinted toward our front door. The driver gunned the engine and sped away before we even reached the porch. We told our mom right away, and she immediately dialed the police. About an hour later, the local cops spotted the exact vehicle trolling a neighboring subdivision, crawling along at 5 miles per hour, while the driver scanned the sidewalks. When the officers flipped on their sirens, the guy panicked and a chaotic police chase ensued. In a wild twist, the pursuit wound up coming right back down our street. Realizing he was completely cornered by cruisers, the guy suddenly abandoned his running van at the dead end of our block. He bailed out of the driver's side and dove headfirst into a dense, brambly ravine at the edge of the asphalt. A tense standoff lasted for a couple of hours. The suspect was badly cut up inside the thick briars, but he was also carrying a concealed weapon. When officers tried to close the perimeter, he actually discharged his firearm directly at them. A brief shootout followed. There was massive shouting, dozens of orders being yelled through megaphones, and 2 K9 units were unleashed into the heavy brush. The dogs quickly overpowered him, forcing his immediate surrender. We watched from our front yard as the officers dragged him out of the woods and loaded him into the back of a police cruiser. As the car pulled away, he leaned his face against the glass and stared directly into our eyes. I honestly do not think the police department should have allowed 2 young kids that close to an active crime scene. But hey, it was the early 90s. Cultural note. During the decade of the 80s and the early 90s, law enforcement agencies across the United States experienced a massive shift in public safety campaigns due to a heightened societal awareness regarding child safety anomalies, commonly referred to as stranger danger. Suburban communities during this era frequently lacked the dense surveillance networks and instant digital communication systems available today, meaning emergency responses relied heavily on immediate telephone reporting and neighborhood watch coordination. The first encounter occurred back when I was only 13 years old. I was participating in an overnight educational class trip out to Quebec City. Our itinerary included a visit to an ancient church called Notre Dame de Victoire, which happens to be the oldest standing stone church on the entire continent. As the sun went down, our group embarked on a historical ghost walk, with this specific church serving as our final stop for the night. The guides led all of us inside the main sanctuary with absolutely all the interior lights turned off. While we stood in the darkness, the main guide began reciting a tense story about an unknown woman who supposedly haunts the historic property. A classmate of mine secretly snapped a quick picture of the altar using the flash. The very second we stepped back outside into the street, he pulled up the digital image to check the quality. My jaw dropped. There was a distinct face of a woman hovering near the center of the photo. She looked translucent, but her features were clear as day. The facial structure did not resemble any student from our school, any teacher, or anyone we had crossed paths with during the entire afternoon. Nobody in our families believed it wasn't just a smudge on the camera lens. The second anomaly took place 2 years later when I was 15, right on Christmas Eve. My family had just packed up our belongings and moved into a brand new house. I was sound asleep in my new upstairs room when a distinct voice whispered a sharp, "Hey," right into my ear. I snapped my eyes open instantly, my heart hammering against my ribs. In the dim light, I saw a tall man standing perfectly still right at the foot of my bed. He looked quite old, and he was dressed in a formal white shirt, a neat black tie, and matching dark slacks. I panicked internally, freezing under my sheets. The exact moment I blinked my eyes to clear my vision, the figure vanished into thin air. A few months later, I casually spoke with a neighbor and found out a chilling detail. The previous owner of the property was an old man who had suddenly lost his life due to natural causes right inside that exact bedroom. Cultural note. Notre Dame de Victoire, constructed in the late 17th century, is deeply tied to regional Canadian folklore and historical urban legends due to its survival through numerous military sieges, including the Battle of Quebec. In architectural and paranormal documentation, older stone structures are often central to local ghost walks because their heavy masonry is culturally romanticized as an ideal setting for residual historical anomalies and unexplained visual artifacts on digital media. I want to preface this by saying that I know how completely unbelievable this sounds. If it were just me, I would probably question my own sanity. But I have an official police report. My dad was right there witnessing the aftermath, and I still hold the photographic evidence on my phone. It was a standard Tuesday morning, and I was driving out to a scheduled therapy appointment. I woke up at my usual time, got dressed, and pulled out of my neighborhood around 9 a.m. The clinic was located about 40 minutes away from my house. I distinctly remember passing the main exit gates of my subdivision, and then nothing. The next literal second, I felt like I suddenly woke up from a deep sleep, completely trapped in thick, heavy mud way off the main road. I glanced at my dashboard clock. It was already 10:20 in the morning. I was violently confused, shivering, and had absolutely zero memory of how I got there, let alone where I actually was. Panicking, I immediately called my therapist to explain that I was not going to make it. She sounded deeply concerned when I told her I was stranded in a ditch, so I snapped a quick photo of the windshield covered in mud and texted it to her so she knew I was not just playing hooky. Then I dialed my dad for help and dropped my live location pin. I had to walk a considerable distance through the brush just to reach the shoulder of the highway so I could flag his truck down. It took him a while, but he finally spotted me. As it turned out, I had somehow driven straight through a security perimeter onto restricted airport property. He had to park his truck far away just to reach my vehicle. While we were waiting, a local construction worker walked over to us. He told us he had actually been driving behind me for a couple of miles. He said I was driving like a bat out of hell, hitting speeds of 70 miles per hour before suddenly veering completely off the asphalt and crashing through the restricted airport boundary. He generously offered to use his rig to tow my car out of the deep muck, but a couple of state police officers arrived shortly after and advised him against it, warning that the thick mud could snap his bumper. Before the officers approached my window, my dad pulled me aside and told me to straight up lie to them. He was terrified they would suspend my license on the spot. He told me to say I simply got lost and was trying to execute a quick U-turn. But that made absolutely no sense. Why would anyone drive hundreds of feet into a dense, muddy field just to turn around? I decided to be honest and told the officers the exact truth about losing consciousness and waking up there. They looked incredibly baffled. They immediately asked if I was under the influence of any heavy substances. At that time, I was utilizing a medical feeding tube and taking standard prescriptions for depression, nausea, and stomach issues. None of those medications had ever caused me to nod off or lose focus before. Then they asked if I had experienced an emotional morning or a severe fight with someone. I had not, but I failed to see how a bad mood could magically wipe out over an hour of my memory anyway. We eventually had to fork over $500 for a heavy-duty commercial tow truck that dragged my sedan out of the swamp. There is absolutely no way I just fell asleep at the wheel. To get to that exact spot, my car had gone way off the highway, executed a perfect loop under a massive concrete bridge, and then navigated through thick woods right alongside an active railroad track. Looking at the tire tracks later, I had somehow managed to dodge concrete barriers, heavy structural columns, and massive oak trees while traveling at 70 miles per hour. Getting stuck in that deep mud probably saved my life. How did I dodge all those obstacles? Why is my brain a complete blank? Why was I speeding so fast? Was it just pure mathematical luck that I did not wrap my car around a tree? Or was something else protecting me out there? None of it adds up. That airport property was not even in the general direction of my clinic. It feels like something else took complete control of my hands and feet while my mind was turned off. I went straight to the emergency room afterward, and the attending doctor casually told me I was just severely dehydrated. Give me a break. Dehydration does not make you navigate an obstacle course at high speeds while completely blacked out. I later visited a specialist neurologist for a full evaluation. Every single scan and test came back completely clear, but due to the unexplained nature of the event, he had to place me on a strict medical driving restriction. Nothing like this has ever happened to me again. I still ask my dad what he thinks occurred that morning, but he rationalizes it by saying, "I probably drove into the woods on purpose just to get attention." Why on earth would I do that? I could have completely destroyed my vehicle. It cost me $500 that I did not have, and I faced major legal trouble for trespassing on federal airport property. I have spent hours searching internet forums, and I finally found a few people who experienced the exact same anomaly. They mentioned a specific medical phenomenon known as an absence seizure, where a person can remain functional enough to operate a vehicle, but wakes up miles away with zero memory. Even though my clinical brain scans showed no abnormal seizure activity during the checkup, the episode could have easily occurred on that specific day without leaving a trace. To this day, every single time I turn my key in the ignition, I feel a subtle, lingering fear that my mind will suddenly switch off again, leaving my body behind the wheel. Cultural note: in the United States, driving privileges are heavily regulated under state departments of motor vehicles. When a motorist reports an unexplained loss of consciousness or a blackout episode, neurologists are legally mandated in several states to report these anomalies, which triggers an automatic medical suspension of the individual's driver's license until they can prove they have been completely episode-free for a period ranging from 3 to 12 months, leaving many patients isolated without a primary means of transit. If you like these stories, make sure to subscribe to the Reddit Oracle.